Let's take a look at the reading 10 study questions, the second part of Plato's Apology. Number one, at the beginning of this reading, Socrates says, "A man who is good for anything ought not to calculate the chance of living or dying. He ought only to consider whether in doing anything he is doing right or wrong." And my question was, can you take this at all seriously? Why not? I mean, I think it's one of those things we come across when somebody says something very, very noble, and we wonder if we could possibly uh, live that way with that degree of nobility. Because essentially, what Socrates is saying here is that what's important is to do the right thing, to be moral, to be ethical, and to live according to your principles, even if it costs you your life, which is a very strident, powerful thing to say. And I have no doubt that Socrates meant it when he said it, and that he proved it. He was willing to die rather than do something that he would consider to be wrong, rather than live in a way that he considered to be unethical. So obviously there's no right answer. I just think it's one of those things where if you're going to take the text seriously and really confront it and ask yourself what it means and what its value is for you, you have to come to terms with that. Am I that serious a person that I'm willing to die for my principles? He was. I have no doubt he was. I just wonder. I don't know. Am I? I don't know. Number two, Socrates says, "For this fear of death is indeed the pretense of wisdom and not real wisdom, being the appearance of knowing the unknown, since no one knows whether death, which they in their fear apprehend to be the greatest evil, may not be the greatest good." How would you describe this attitude towards death? Again, an open-ended question. Here's how I would describe this attitude. That worrying about death and fearing it, therefore, and doing things to avoid it, although I think it's good practice to avoid death, is the pretense of wisdom, and says we don't know what death is. We don't know if it's good or bad. We don't know if it's neither good or bad. I mean, certainly, philosophers like Epicurus, contemporary of Plato, would say it's neither good nor bad. It's nothing to us because we cease to exist at death. So it can't be a bad thing for us or a good thing. But this attitude towards death is I can only go on the basis of what I know, the philosopher's attitude towards death. I must base my actions upon what I know, and I don't know anything about death really. I don't know if it's good or bad, so I can't act as if it's a bad thing because I don't know it. It's not that Socrates is eager to die. He's not. He lets us know that he's not eager to die, and he is trying to defend himself. And I believe he is trying to persuade the jury that he's innocent of these charges. But he's definitely got limits in terms of what he's willing to do to stay alive, and he reaches those limits, and he, accepts his fate. Number three, on page 7, Socrates says that the life which is unexamined is not worth living. What does he mean? Do you agree with it? Well, this is this is the most famous part of the text, a famous quote from the text that the unexamined life is not worth living. I wanted to get that out there. What does he mean? Do you agree with him? Well, what does he mean? I don't know. I mean, what I can tell you what I think he means is that being a human being, you're a rational creature. So just living your life without thinking about your life is not a real life. It's not a life worth living. Human beings have the capacity not only to think, not only to act and live their lives, but to think about them, how they should act and how they should live their lives. Right? That's, one may say, what separates us from all living creatures is that we not only live our lives, we think about what the best way to live is. We have that capacity. Were we not to use it, I think Socrates would say, is not to live a human life, a truly human life, which is a life of rational reflection to some degree, constant rational reflection. So to him, doing philosophy, which is essentially reflecting upon, inquiring upon the good life, how life should be lived, is an essential part of life itself. So that if, the context is that he's basically telling them, don't sentence me to stop doing philosophy because I can't possibly do that, because I wouldn't be, why would I want to keep living if I couldn't do that? Number 4, what does Socrates mean when he refers to himself on page 2? I don't know if this is, I'm sorry if I got the pages wrong. as a gadfly. Another very, very famous part of the Apology, where he describes himself as the gadfly, which is essentially the pesky insect that stings, but that stinging is an awakening sting. He compares the city of Athens to a great horse, a great powerful beast, which is lazy, which tends to fall into a stupor. And Socrates is the one, through his questioning, that wakes it up. That is a continuing metaphor for what he's doing, being awake, being asleep. That I think the implication is that most of us go through our lives in a kind of a sleep, a daze, fog. And Socrates, who says he knows nothing, at least knows how to ask questions, though, at least to expose our ignorance. His own ignorance, he admits, and he wants others to see that they don't know what they assume that they know, and that assumption of knowledge when it's really ignorance is a kind of a slumber. And Socrates describes himself or compares himself to a pesky, stinging fly that wakes us up, that opens our eyes to our real situation. Very, very famous, and I would say very powerful um, metaphor.